Hi, this is Jurgen Rasmussen. Welcome to the Provocative Hypnosis blog. This episode is about how the self is an illusion and the psychological trick behind that very illusion. So, first of all, let me specify that when I use the term illusion, I don't mean to imply non existence. I'm meaning to imply that there is something, but it's not what you think it is. So we are not who we think we are. This illusory self that we seem to have, this feeling of there being such a thing as a self, very often behind the eyes, looking out at a world that's separate from us, and this illusion that this permanent, stable thing like self has a past, is in the now, and is moving into a future. That's the illusion. That's the notion that seems so, but never quite survives scrutiny. So, the first way in which this thing like self is an illusion is that it's not actually a thing at all. It's an activity, it's a process, it's a habit of sorts. So, it would be way more accurate to talk about selfing. Instead of a self, the activity or process of selfing, of making distinctions between self and not self. And as I will argue in my next video, it seems to be a necessary illusion of sorts to develop psychologically. So here's how it is an illusion. And by the way, something very exciting is that both current day neuroscience and the old meditation traditions have both landed on this from very different angles. So when neuroscientists study the brain, they don't find a seat of self anywhere. They don't find a self or a decision maker or a chooser or an initiator. They don't find anyone who's doing, any captain of the ship or CEO anywhere in the brain. It's more like an orchestra where no one's actually leading it. And of course, if you meditate, you have the opportunity to have a perceptual shift that clearly points out that the thing like self is an illusion. So here's the basis behind the trick. There is the activity of seeing. This is something you can verify in your own experience. Now it's a verb, it's verbing, right? It's seeing. It's the process of seeing. So there's some object being perceived and there's the knowing of it. This you can verify in your own experience. But what then very often happens is that the selfing process then kicks in. The I thought appears and takes credit and claims it and says, I saw that. I saw that bird flying by. But here's the problem. The I thought that takes credit for seeing the bird flying by was not actually there during the perception. I thought is an ad hoc entity. It's an afterthought that shows up on the stage after the fact and claims credit for something it has no part in. Same goes with hearing. There is the activity of listening. There are sound waves, there's meaning making, you know, and there's the knowing of it. Right? So let's say that you hear a car driving by, the activity of hearing. Right? Then the I thought, the selfing process again, might kick in and say, I heard that car. But once again, the I thought that claims credit for doing the listening was not there during the actual listening. It's once again an afterthought that appears on the scene after the activity. The non-duality teacher John Klein used to liken this to a clown that jumps up on stage after a theater performance, bows and takes credit for the performance. The only problem is the clown was never there during the performance. It's an imposter that shows up after the fact. There's the activity of smelling. There's the activity of thinking, right? Thoughts appear. And then afterwards, there's an afterthought that says, I did that. I chose that. I made that decision. But in reality, there is no thinker behind the thoughts. There's just the thoughts. The thought that claims to be the thinker is just another thought. It's just another thought in the process. A feeling appears, right? The activity of feeling and the knowing of it appears. Then the I thought appears again and said, I felt that. That's my feeling. But again, this I thought is the clown that jumps up on the stage after the performance and claims credit for something that happened before it even came onto the stage. So the psychological trick here is that what comes after the ad hoc entity, the I thought, the end product is implied to be there before the process, and thereby to be the initiator and the creator and the doer of the process. That's the psychological magic trick. So I'll say it again. The end result of the process, the ad hoc entity that appears on stage after the show is over, is implied to have been there before the process or performance started and to be the initiator of it. The I that saw, the I that chooses, the I that decides or feels, which is an ad hoc entity after the fact, is implied to have been there before the process and thereby to be the initiator of it. So there is a verbing that kind of implies a noun. The self-referential thinking implies a thinker. The feelings seem to imply a feeler. The actions seem to imply a doer that was there before the action and has free will and who is the initiator of it. This is the illusion. This is the illusion that gives rise to this seeming experience of being a self that has a past, is in the now, and has a future. This stable, permanent entity that moves across time. This illusion is created by I thoughts, like filler thoughts, that appear as these ad hoc entities after sensory experiences, after other thoughts and feelings. And then I thought 68 in the chain comes up, claims credit, and kind of weaves a story where it connects itself to all the other I thoughts and creates this narrative of I, this collection of thoughts, which implies a stable self, was there the entire time. Right? So that's one of the tricks. The other trick is this notion that I, in here, am somehow separate from life or the world out there. And this is also created by this sense of being the thinker or being the doer. But if you investigate your own experience, you see very clearly that seeing appears. So there's an object appearing and there's a knowing of it, But if you look for the seer or the listener or the thinker or the feeler, it's nowhere to be found. It's nowhere to be found. So it's just experience. For all practical purposes, if you think back to, you know, being in school at an early age, talking about a tree, the teacher might have said, look, here's the tree, and the tree is dependent upon the soil and the sunlight and the wind and the rain and the oxygen to survive. We use language that way, and it's necessary. It's a necessary illusion to be able to make useful distinctions. But it makes it seem as if there's this separate entity called a tree, which is dependent upon the soil and the sunlight and the oxygen. But in reality, there is no tree independent on the soil and the sunlight and the oxygen. It all emerges as one thing, as one process. You could say that what you call the tree is the sunlight, is the oxygen. So, in the same way, this very same illusion gets people to think that they are their thoughts, or their feelings, or that they are this body, right? So when I ask them, who are you? They might say, well, I'm an optimist, or I'm a mother of two, or I'm 64 years old, or I'm a musician, or whatever they might, or I'm over here, this body, and you're over there. When I ask them, are you the sun, or are you the oxygen? They usually think I'm a tree hugging hippie, or that I've lost my marbles somehow. But this organism that they take to be themselves, which is another mistake, but this organism that they take to be themselves, through language, there's this illusion that that organism is separate from life and an independent entity. But without the oxygen, without the sunlight, there is no body, right? So you could say that what you call the person as well is the sunlight, is the oxygen, emerges as one thing. In that sense, you could say that you are the total environment. So one consequence of this self-illusion is that, as the developmental psychologist Robert Kegan says, most of us, engage in a second job that no one's paying us to do, which contains itself with, protecting our image, bolstering a particular self-concept or identity, covering our mistakes, and that this job gets in the way of the job that we're actually paid to do. Almost all of our thinking, not all of it, but most of it, is self-referential, and it revolves around a projected future or a reconstructed past, where it seems as if we are that character, right? But the I is never now. The I is never now. It's never actually experienced in this moment. So much of our thinking then revolves around bolstering and enhancing this mind-made notion of who we think we are, that we mistakenly take to be our nature. This is the huge. And given that it looks as if we are the chooser and are the decision maker and are the thinker, um, this creates a lot of performance anxiety and depression, and most of our psychological suffering ultimately has its roots in this illusion. If you look at perfectionism, the notion of having to be in control, having to perform, needing approval, uh, why do we engage in this sort of thinking? Because it seems as if, because we rate ourselves based upon performance and based upon approval, right? So our very sense of self seems to be in the firing line as a result of it. So I'm going to make my next video about why this illusion seems to be necessary to some extent to develop psychologically. But there is an enormous liberation in being able to see through it. It just frees up so much. It just really, really is liberating in so many ways. So I remember when I started meditating. I started meditating when I was 14. Um, when I first came across this idea that the self was an illusion, it just seemed preposterous because, of course, I am, so to speak. And I remember as a young person, I was very influenced by the writings of the psychologist Nathaniel Branden. And he always used to write, if and when the gates of enlightenment open, who is it that does the self-transcending? I do. There's no escape from that simple fact. But this is just a perceptual shift. Like when the mind slows down enough, there is a seeing that, oh shit, these I thoughts that come and go are come and go moment by moment. They kind of create themselves and dissolve and recreate themselves. And they're a combination of images and self-talk and body sensations, right? And when there's enough sensory clarity and enough stillness, suddenly it's seen that this is a psychological process that comes and goes, and every time that process slows or comes to a halt, that which remains has no feeling of being a self. So people very often say, I'm conscious. But with some inquiry, it's easily seen that the I comes and goes in consciousness. And that which remains whenever that I thought dissolves does not feel like a self. And there you have the illusion. So our language is dualistic. It's necessary to be able to say I, conventionally and socially, so that you know whose bags you pick up at the airport. But this idea that it's another. So let's say that there's a perceptual shift, that there's an insight as a result of the activity of meditation. There's enough sensory clarity, there's enough concentration that it's suddenly seen that, oh shit, this sense of an I is actually just a series of thoughts. It's an illusion that comes and goes. What very easily will happen now is that the selfing process starts up again and takes credit for it and says, I saw that. I saw through that illusion. I am enlightened or I am awakened. But this is just more of the same delusion. The I thought that comes in and takes credit for the awakening experience is once again an afterthought that came onto the scene after the show was done. It would be a bit like, imagine a restaurant where the pizza comes out of the kitchen and where it's suddenly claimed that the pizza that came out of out of the kitchen is the source of the ingredients that were orchestrated in the kitchen. The I thought that claims the experience after the fact is just another afterthought. So I hope this was useful. If this was inspiring, and if you're curious about the work I do, you can reach me at provocative hypnosis.com. Till next time.